Good morning, colleagues. Thank you and a warm welcome to all of you to the Poker SA Ponder virtual presentation series. We will commence with a short presentation lasting about 30 minutes, a question and answer session of 10 minutes, and conclude with a lucky prize draw. You are welcome to field questions in the chat box during the presentation, which will be answered at the end. This morning, Mike Quinn will enlighten us on a trendy and very interesting topic, overcoming adversity to achieve success. In this Ponder presentation, Mike will take us through the hard-earned lessons about succeeding in the face of ruthless competition, financial crisis, and demanding execution challenges. Mike Quinn's remarkable story provides insights into how a pioneering African startup succeeded despite tremendous adversity, ruthless pushback from major competitors, financial crisis, and a continuous struggle to execute the growth strategy. His story, captured in his recent book, shares raw lessons on succeeding through adversity and learning what entrepreneurship in Africa is all about. The hard-earned lessons are translatable for entrepreneurs, business executives, and higher education professionals. Mike Quinn is a co-founder and CEO of Boost, with a mission to power the growth of Africa's 100 million informal retail entrepreneurs. Thank you, Mike, and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me. I'm going to share my screen and jump into the presentation. All right. Yeah, so it's a real privilege being here, and I appreciate being invited to speak with you all this morning. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself in the presentation and tell my story, but I'm the author of a book called Failing to Win, Hard-Earned Lessons from a Purpose-Driven African Startup. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll kind of walk through the lessons I learned from some pretty intense failure experiences and how to overcome them. So the agenda for today, I'm going to do a very brief introduction about me. I'm going to tell the story of my former company that I co-founded and I was CEO of for 10 years called Zona, and then wrap up with some of the hard-earned lessons. So first about me. So I grew up in a very middle-class family in Western Canada in a town called Calgary. My parents were both high school teachers. In a million years, I never imagined I would spend my entire career working in Africa, and let alone become the CEO of one of the first fintech businesses on the continent. But a big turning point for me was in 2003 when I joined a startup organization called Engineers Without Borders Canada. I would just finish a mechanical engineering degree, and I really was looking for some purpose in my life. And I didn't just want to go work for an oil company, which was kind of where all the jobs were at the time. And I wasn't very mechanically inclined, despite having studied it for 5 years. And so I joined this organization, and then they sent me to first to Ghana for a year, and then I did a second volunteer placement with them in Zambia. So I actually spent 2.5 years working in rural agriculture projects in these two countries in very different regions of Africa. This is a picture of me in southern Zambia, just near Livingston along the Zimbabwe border. And I was working with small-scale farmers to grow a drought-resistant cereal crop that they could sell to the market. And it was a very entrepreneurial project, but driven by an NGO and funded by donor money. And I learned a lot about poverty, and saw all the opportunities and challenges as well of overcoming, or like what could be possible to overcome it, and trying to use an entrepreneurial approach to change things, which I didn't find existed within the current project I was working on. And so I wanted to go, I actually left with more questions than answers, and I wanted to go gain some more insights around some of the bigger picture questions around poverty. And I got into a master's program in international development in the UK, and then got very lucky and got into the business school at Oxford to study an MBA. And so I had this was way overeducated, I should say. And I had this mixture of like an engineering, international development, and business background. And while I was at Oxford, I came up with this idea to start an organization called African Enterprise Partners to connect investors and funders with entrepreneurs in Africa that were building purpose-driven but highly scalable businesses. And this was like 2008. And at the time, I kept meeting all of these funders and investors through like the network I was building that were like had money in places like London and New York and Washington that were saying they wanted to invest in Africa. They didn't want to put in just to NGOs or to aid projects. They wanted to invest in entrepreneurs, but they didn't have deal flow, which means like they didn't know how to find entrepreneurs that were building these businesses. And I kind of put my hand up and said, there's entrepreneurs all across the continent, and I'll go find them, and then I'll be a connector and facilitate the capital moving from where it is to where it's needed. Which leads me to like the main part of the presentation, the Zona story. And it starts in early February 2009, where through my pitch for African Enterprise Partners, I got connected to a fund in the US called the Grassroots Business Fund that had made a couple small investments in Kenya and wanted to expand their portfolio. And I said, I had a good network in Zambia because I'd worked there most recently. They bought me a plane ticket to go find entrepreneurs. I sent one email to an American guy I had met when I was there, and he introduced me to these two brothers who were Zambian-born South Africans named Brad and Brett. They were in Lusaka. Actually, Brett had got married in Cape Town, so I met them here in Lusaka, but Brett was actually living in Cape Town. And they had started a company called Mobile Transactions. And the company was digitizing payments to small-scale farmers in Zambia's cotton sector. And the technology was just revolutionary at the time. So there were companies that were paying out tens of millions of US dollars, so like 100 million plus rand, to really small-scale farmers across rural Zambia. And the farmers, it was all in cash. So the companies would have cash and transit vehicles driving down bumpy roads. The farmers would come out, receive their payment after their cotton crop was weighed. They would put their thumbprints down, and then the company would hand out cash to the farmer. Receipts would go back to the head office. Everything was manually reconciled. And what these two guys had done is they had built a system where the employee of the cotton company, in this case the company was Dunavant, could have a little netbook computer, which was fashionable at the time, because this was before smartphones, before iPads, with a little GPRS dongle to connect to the internet. So even though you're in very rural areas, there would be a data signal, and the system could determine what loan the farmers were given at the beginning of the year for their seeds and fertilizers, and then reconcile the payment that was due to them, and then beam that information up to a cloud-based server in Geneva, where the head office of the cotton company could use the information on real-time cotton purchases in Zambia and yields to then lock in forward trades on the international cotton market. So it was quite like groundbreaking at the time, and I was just like in awe with their technology. And meanwhile, over in Kenya, there was one of the world's first, if not the world's first, fintech and definitely mobile money provider called M-Pesa, had just started and was starting to go viral and scale exponentially. And this, again, before smartphones were ubiquitous. So what M-Pesa allowed people to do was to use a very simple feature phone like this Nokia here to digitally store money and send and receive it to their relatives, to their businesses or their suppliers, or to pay school fees or hospital bills. And like most of Africa, Kenya had, I think 90% of the adult population was unbanked. And so this was like another groundbreaking technology to help people send and receive money without bank accounts. And we looked at this technology for the farmers, and then saw what was happening with M-Pesa. I helped close a $200,000 investment, US dollar investment, from this grassroots business fund that I was consulting with. to actually provide the seed capital to the business, which was one of the first fintech investments on the continent from an international investor. And we put these three things together and then created a company that was initially called Mobile Transactions, that then rebranded a couple of years later as Zona, which means it's real in the Zambian language of Nyanja, and also in Malawi and Chichewa. And it turned out like we tried to do the cotton farmer payments for a little while longer. That ended up being like a very hard business model because agricultural payments are seasonal. We wanted to pay farmers who were getting mobile phones digitally directly into their mobile wallets. But the first thing the farmer would ask is like, where can I get my cash? Because there was no use for digital money. And so we kind of had the audacity to say, well, what if we bring the M-Pesa model in Kenya into Zambia? Because the characteristics of the market were similar, like a much smaller market, 13 million people at the time. But 90% of people don't have bank accounts, and sending and receiving money was a huge pain. And the real innovation from M-Pesa that I think we were clever enough to pick up on was not the mobile money in the cell phone. It was that they figured out how to like democratize an agent network and turn a banking branch network, and they could turn a bank branch into a person in a retail shop with a phone and a cash box, and that person could be a bank branch for his or her community. So consumers could go do cash in or cash out at these like little micro agents, and because of that, you could have like an agent everywhere. So people could deposit or withdraw cash into their mobile wallets, like at any small shop in Kenya. And we copied that innovation and said, well, let's set up an agent network in Zambia. But we didn't have the technology or the regulation at the time to actually have a consumer store of value on a mobile wallet. And so we simplified the offering and said, well, let's just use the agent to do cash in, cash out, so people could come and send and receive money. And we set up little kiosks like this one. This is in the center of Lusaka, painted them with a sign that said, send money here. We were so unsophisticated at the time. Our first flyers were hand painted. It was cheaper than actually printing them. So we had the pricing on the right hand side, and there was just no alternative for people to send money. So the customers started coming. This is a queue of customers standing outside ready to send money to their relatives somewhere else in Zambia. And inside there would be an agent that would have their phone and receive the cash, process the transaction, earn a commission, and then instantly somebody could go to another one of our agents somewhere else in the country and receive the cash, and that agent would pay it out and also earn a commission. And it was all processed on our technology. So fast forward a couple of years, and I'd love to say it just took off. Like you can see in that last picture, there was a lot of customers, but it turned out like it was really hard because we had a lot of ups and downs of how do you find the right person to be an agent, and how do you incentivize them, and how do you make sure that they always have cash. And we started providing unsecured loans to our agents to make sure that when a customer came to receive money, they always had it. And then how do you make sure they don't run away from that money, and then like performance manage them. And then we figured out the brand, and then slowly but surely we started setting up these agents in all the key nodes across Zambia. So next to banks and post office, and the high streets of every major town. And then we got more and more rural, and just built out a growing network of cash in, cash out points for people to send and receive money. And then eventually it just grew and snowballed. Fast forward, we reached a peak, I think towards the end of 2018, where we had a quarter of the adult population as active users. So this grew into like a very big service. But we didn't have the vision of just like being a money transfer service. We had like a much bigger vision that was crystallized as on our wall as a cashless Africa. That was like the vision we had. And I was actually just looking through some archives when I was preparing this presentation, and saw this article that was written about us back in 2014 about our ambition to democratize Zambian banking. And so we were really early in the market. There's a lot of startups trying to do this now in many African countries. And back in like 2014, we were certainly one of the first. But before that, in 2012, we closed a $4 million investment, which was the first Series A equity investment from an international investor in fintech on the continent. And Series A is kind of the nomenclature that investors and founders use for like the rounds of investment. So you first have like a seed investment, and then a Series A, and then a Series B, and then a Series C, and they get larger and larger and larger until eventually you may have like an exit in the form of like an IPO or a strategic buyer or something invest capital into you. So Series A was like, we had proven a little bit, but it was a big injection of cash to start scaling up on this vision of democratizing Zambian banking. And we evolved our platform to start doing all these other services for payments for corporates, for donors, for NGOs, for the government. And for example, we were doing a project for the government to process fertilizer subsidies to small-scale farmers, NGOs to deliver aid via electronic distribution mechanisms. So the service offering was expanding, all on the back of this agent network that could always like process the cash in, cash out transactions. We were alone in the market for a number of years, for the first few years, and so that gave us the ability to make a lot of mistakes. It did take us 5 years to kind of really figure out the model, and like we were constantly running out of cash. So even though we before we got our Series A investment, we were scrambling for money all the time. Like we burned through the first investment pretty quickly. I went back to my parents because I wanted to be a full partner in the business with these two brothers that initially like never dreamed of taking international investment. And I convinced them to mortgage their retirement house and lend me $100,000 to be able to invest in the business and become a partner. And it was at a time when we were completely broke and we were near bankruptcy. So I had all my skin in the game from doing that. My parents also were not wealthy. It's just like they put all their assets up at the bank to generate the cash because they believed in me, and I did a pretty strong sales pitch of what we were doing and how this was going to scale across the continent. But eventually the competition came. So there were two telcos in Zambia, MTN, which I'm sure everybody knows, and Airtel, which was an Indian telco that had acquired a multinational company in Africa and rolled out services across the continent. And so the cell phone and mobile industry was like growing exponentially, and more people were getting phones. But the mobile operators wanted to copy the M-Pesa innovation from Kenya. And so they launched mobile money. They launched the same service. MTN called it MTN Mobile Money, and Airtel called it Airtel Money, not very creatively. And they initially launched with a bang in Zambia with a huge marketing campaign, like both of them, where they said mobile money is here and you can send and receive money in your phone. And they had a huge distribution network because they had all these small shops that were selling scratch cards. And so we were quite nervous, naturally, at the beginning. We probably had like less than 100 agents around the country. And our agents were getting kind of smaller, like this little green kiosk in the center of this picture. But once they launched, initially they had no traction. They just made a lot of noise, but nobody was using the service. And then they looked at Zona and said, oh, well, there's all these kiosks popping up and these consumers coming to send and receive money. Let's copy their kiosk model. And so MTN, being the kind of big aggressive competitor as they are, got better looking kiosks and had to make them taller. So they imported them from South Africa and they added like an extra meter at the top to make sure that they were taller. And overnight, they rolled them out so close to our agents that some of our agents like had to crawl through the window to get in because they couldn't even open the door to get into their kiosk. Like you can see in that picture how close they planted them to us. Airtel went to our supplier, which was a local Zambian manufacturer, and made theirs wider, right? So they were trying to differentiate on the kiosk design. And what we knew, we were worried at the time, but we kind of took a deep breath and said, if it's all about the kiosk, then we don't have a business here. And what we knew was it was about the service, the trust, and making sure that the customers that came to send and receive money always got a great experience and a great service from our agents. And if we could deliver on that, we knew that they would come back and repeat. And the real competitor was that little blue minibus taxi behind in the back of the picture, because that was how people used to move money around. They would just physically carry it around. So the noise actually accelerated our growth, where Airtel and MTN created all this free marketing. People would go to try their services. Their services didn't work because their agents didn't have cash. They didn't have float. The systems were often down. You can see like the MTN kiosk is closed in this one. So they might be selling some scratch cards, but even their agents would say, oh, just use Zona, it's a better service. And then it just drove customers to us, and we made sure our service worked all the time. And then you can see the results in this graph. So the blue line is the Zambia traction. So it took us 50 months from inception to get to like an inflection point and start scaling rapidly. But then we did a pilot, and we went into Malawi. And by this time, we kind of had figured a lot of things out. So we took our Zambia team, we drove across the border, we did a partnership with a supermarket chain that we could put our kiosks inside. We recruited a number of agents from a youth association, and our agents were people like straight out of high school with diplomas looking for jobs, right? So they weren't proven entrepreneurs. They were young people. We were trying to get at least 50% of them to be women. And we provided all of them with loans initially. We would give them like a $500 US equivalent loan that they could use to make sure that they could always provide the cash in, cash out. And we just treated it as like it's on good faith. We hope nobody runs away with it, because if they run away with it, they lose the business opportunity. If they use it, then they can earn commissions that will generate far more income for them in the longer run. And you can see the red line here on the graph is what happened in Malawi. So in the first year of launching Malawi, we achieved what took 4 years in Zambia. It was a very successful launch, and at this point we were flying. We were off to the races and thought we had like an amazing business. Then Malawi really got turbocharged, where we did a partnership with a remittance company called Makuru. We first launched in Zambia, and so Makuru had started. They built a big business for Zimbabweans in South Africa to send money back home. And they had a platform and a license to do international remittances from South Africa. And then they built a branch network in Zimbabwe. And they wanted to expand. And they integrated with our technology and first expanded to Zambia. And it didn't really work. For some reason or others, they're like, whether it was just the diaspora of Zambians, didn't use Makuru or didn't send a lot of money back home. So for the first year, we didn't really think much of it. But then we switched on Malawi, and it just exploded. There are hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million Malawians in South Africa, working in the service industry, and they send a large percentage of their income back to their relatives. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. And this is like the demand. You can see this is one of our agents. I believe it's in Blantyre. And this was like the demand on a busy period. I think this was just before Christmas. All of these people are queuing to receive Makuru payments from South Africa. And there was one Christmas Eve where we broke 4 banks in the country, because our agents would have to pay out cash. Then we had partnerships with banks where the agents would run to the bank and then give them the electronic currency that was credited on our system with each payout, and then convert it to cash, and then go back to their kiosk and pay out again to more customers. And they couldn't keep up with the demand, so that just happened so quickly that the banks eventually, like across the country in Malawi, ran out of cash, and they couldn't service our agents anymore. It was like incredible demand. That became a $100 million a year corridor, which was like, say, over 1.5 billion rand. It was bigger than any World Bank estimate of remittances from South Africa to Malawi. It became the fastest growing corridor in Africa of people sending money back. And it was because Zona opened up this payment network, or this cash out network, that facilitated this. Because before, people would have all of this risk where they would have to wait until they went back to Malawi to physically carry cash, or they'd have to find somebody to move it for them physically by going to a bus station and paying somebody to paying a bus driver to bring the money and hoping it didn't get stolen and that would end up in Malawi. So everything was going well at that time, and we turned profitable because we made a margin on every transaction. We were building up a big Cape Town technology and finance, like fintech hub, where we centralized our finance team, our operations team, our brand, our product, our tech. And then we had a currency crisis. This is on the graph on the right is the Zambian kwacha to the US dollar. It went from 6 to 1 to 14 to 1 in a very rapid period, driven by a Chinese stock market crash, and then a crash in copper prices, and Zambia is a copper producing nation. And this was hugely disruptive for us because we had a cost center in South African Rand. We had dollar denominated equity investment, and we had just raised a bunch of debts because we were profitable. And suddenly we went from that position to only having 6 weeks of cash and being near bankrupt. Luckily, our investors and shareholders put in a little bit of money to bridge us. And we went on the offensive, and we raised what was another groundbreaking investment round, a $15 million US Series B investment round, led by the private investment arm of the World Bank called the IFC. And the fundamentals of the business were so strong. We were growing at like 200+% year on year. Customer retention was really strong. Local currency, we were doing well, but it was like we had this balance sheet and cash flow challenge. So we wanted to have a cushion, but we also wanted to diversify because that really woke everybody's eyes up, and especially our investors, kind of scared everybody around the risks of being concentrated in one market and with currency risk. And it's I know it's the same in South Africa as well, with like the volatility of the rand. And so this, our investor that led the round actually pushed us very aggressively to expand. And we looked at a few different countries. So we were looking at Ghana and West Africa, but found it was too far. MTN was actually getting a lot of traction there, so we didn't want to compete. We wanted a bigger market, so we looked at DRC. It ended up there was a political and economic crisis right when we were starting, so we couldn't get going, and we couldn't actually get a regulatory license. We didn't want to go into East Africa because M-Pesa was very strong, and so we picked Mozambique, which was a country of 30 million people, huge geography, very, very low access to financial services, and felt that there was a strong use case for our service of people needing to send money, from Maputo and Matola up north or to different towns, because the infrastructure was poor and the geography was like the distances were vast, and we struggled. First of all, the Portuguese law that Mozambique operates made it very bureaucratically difficult to set up agents. So there was a lot of applications and bureaucracy to kind of cut through. But we figured that out, and we ended up setting a network of these kiosks across the country. The branding was great. We recruited some really great young people as agents. We rolled out the playbook that we had in Zambia and Malawi and gave them all float. But the customers didn't come. And this was a big change from what happened in Malawi, where every time we opened an agent, consumers would just come and it, like organically, it was like there was so much pent up demand. In Mozambique, it turned out there wasn't really a use case for sending money. Like people were more used to saving. I don't know if there was alternate channels, but it didn't work the way it did in Zambia and Malawi. And because we were well funded at the time, we hired a really big team. And we were throwing marketing money at this, and we ended up spending about $6 million US to generate virtually no revenue. It was a huge, huge failure. A lot of lessons learned, of course, but just like a very humbling failure, like experience of like market entry and how it could go wrong. And so we regrouped. It was one of the advantages of having a lot of money in the bank is we weren't dead yet, but we were severely wounded. And then we regrouped and kind of looked at what was still going right in Zambia and Malawi, and got back to our core. And this is a woman named Masozi, who was one of our very first agents in Zambia. She started with us when she was 22. She had $500 equivalent US to her name. So say like 7,000 Rand or so, and put all of it into her business. We also provided a little bit of capital, set her up in a kiosk. She started making so much money in her kiosk that she hired her relatives to be her tellers for her. And then over the years, like I visited her then like 5 years later, she had expanded to employing 43 people out of a network of 27 kiosks, and was turning over equivalent of like 15 million Rand a month in transactions. And I did this customer immersion trip where I spent a month like visiting agents like Masozi across Zambia and Malawi, and I would work with them and actually even like spend the nights in their houses and have dinner with their families and just get to meet them as people. And it really like brought me back to like the root of why we were building this company, and like the magic around creating these business opportunities for these micro entrepreneurs. And we then, we cut our expansion plans and said, like, let's just focus on our core markets in Zambia and Malawi, and let's evolve. Let's roll out a digital bank that, because we can't just do money transfers forever. We were starting to reach saturation in the market. We had 2 million active customers, moving $80 million US per month of transactions. So like this was a big service at the time. And we developed our technology all out of Cape Town and launched a new platform called Zona Plus, which was a fully fledged like digital bank where you could save at a groundbreaking like 10% per annum interest rate, which was unheard of at the time. We like launched free money transfers. We had 7, 14, and 30-day working capital loans. We had no monthly charges. There was an app on Android that was designed, with human-centered design practices to be really simple for first-time smartphone users to use, along with a USSD service so people could use simple phones to this service. And we had a team of like 220 people. This was our Cape Town office. We had 22 nationalities. It was like an amazing business, and we spent a lot of time and effort like building the culture for this. And then, boom, MTN first struck, and they had been in the market at this point for like 5 or 6 years, and we had like a dominating market share, well over 70+%. And MTN then launched what they called a carpet bombing attack, where everywhere we had a green Zona kiosk, they rolled out 10 yellow ones, like literally in a row like this. It was just like completely irrational. But their strategy was, well, let's just throw money to steal Zona's market share, and let's just like carpet bomb the market with our brand so that everybody like sees us everywhere, and then they don't see Zona. Their competitor Airtel then responded and did the same thing. And so this is a street corner in the center of Lusaka. You can see a little Zona kiosk in the middle that used to be the first one. Then eventually there was like one yellow and one red, and we were still getting all the customers because our service was better. And then suddenly it just went crazy, where now there's like 10 red and 10 yellow kiosks next to ours. And this was not like just one corner. This was like all the street like corners. We had 3,000 of these agents, and MTN and Airtel were doing this like super aggressively. And then meanwhile, there was also a change of regulation that they were able to lobby for that meant that every single person with a SIM card automatically was registered for a mobile money wallet. And so now there's like there are kiosks everywhere. Everybody has a Airtel or MTN mobile money wallet, and it was free for them to send money. And for our customers, we charged a fee to send, and it was free to withdraw. For their customers, it was free to deposit and charged a fee to withdraw. And they started getting like customers that way. And we had this like our Zona Plus service offering was still very strong. Our brand was strong in the market. We acquired 50,000 customers on Zona Plus in the first 3 months. But then we had quite a death blow to us, where a $40 million investment round that we were working on for 4 months to really capitalize the business and build us our balance sheet to compete and to cut our prices as well, because we needed money to like really go, to go lean. Fell apart because we had a lead investor that was this big private equity investor in Europe, changed their strategy on us like very late in the process. So we went into quite a death spiral at the time. My first 9 years there was like building this incredible company, and my last 9 years was taking it down from 200 employees to, like by the time I left, it was close to 40, and it still survived. We managed to get enough money and kind of regroup and develop a new strategy. But we lost like 90% of our revenue very, very quickly. Like most of our staff, like everything we built kind of just like fell apart very quickly. And I ended up leaving in May 2019 in a deal with our shareholders and management, where we were just going to like spin off a new B2B fintech company and just shrink down into like a really, really small business. So it was a very painful lesson that was hard. And so this is where I'll kind of finish my presentation, just with a couple of like two big like takeaway hard-earned lessons that I learned from this experience. So lesson number one, which was something I had to process personally, was like failing is not the same as being a failure. And I left, I was like quite burned out, very shell-shocked. I'm like, what actually happened? And it definitely felt like a failure. But then I started, talking to people and reflecting back, and I actually started writing about it as a really a healing process. I wasn't thinking of how do I write a book to like tell this story, but it was really around how do I reflect on what I learned and like get out of this headspace of like, I failed to win, we failed to win, and then look back at like what we actually achieved. And in the 10 years I was there, we processed $2.5 billion of transactions for 3+ million consumers. We generated $26 million US in income for our 3,000 micro entrepreneur agents. We earned $86 million in revenue from fees. We raised $35 million in global venture investment, and we proved an innovative model in a completely underserved market that was on nobody's radar. And Zona was like winning global awards, at our peak. And we created this market, even though competitors came and kind of took it, and we couldn't get the capital we needed to get to the next stage. I'm very, very proud of what we achieved. And we really also seeded an ecosystem. So now that the money that you might read about that's flowing to startups across the continent, Zona was one of the first businesses to do this. Second big lesson is that failure can be a superpower if you embrace it and learn from it. And so as I was writing, I was reflecting on this, and I was like, we were winning the whole time. And every milestone we achieved was because we failed and failed and failed and failed and failed until we actually had a breakthrough, and we turned it into a win. So it was very much like, instead of failing to win, I started to reflect on how we were failing in order to win. And then I asked myself, well, how might I take this like penultimate failure at Zona in order to win at my next business? And that kind of gave me the energy and idea to start all over again. And I set up a new company at the end of 2019 called Boost. And initially it was just an idea of powering the growth for informal sector retail entrepreneurs across Africa, using a commerce technology that would allow them to order their stock, access working capital, digitally manage businesses. And so these are township businesses across the country, or across the continent. During COVID, we managed to launch in Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt. This woman is a woman named Essie in Imizamu Yetu Township in Cape Town, who's one of our top customers, that uses our product, mobile product, to order all of her stock, with primarily meat products, and then do door-to-door delivery service in her community. Since launching our pilot in July 2020, all remotely during COVID, we've managed to grow into 4 countries that have done like a cumulative order value of $1 million US. And we're now growing at 35% month on month. So I learned a lot around like the things that worked at Zona and the things that didn't work, and how I could use and harness like those failures and set something up to build a new business. So I'm probably a few minutes over time, so I'll end it there, but just want to say thank you for having me. Like this story is outlined in detail in my book. I go into three big lessons: founding the company and like the early development and innovation, the main part of failing, which is the 8 biggest failures we had, and what I learned from them and what I would have done differently. And then the last section is called winning, of how I was able to translate these failures into starting Boost. Available in South Africa at Exclusive Books, Take a Lot, and also online. You can get an audiobook on Audible, and you can get it on Amazon Kindle and also on Kobo. So just really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike, for your insightful presentation. Colleagues, I've noticed that we have gone over time a bit, but we still have 5 minutes for questions. So we'll now take some questions in the chat box. So there's a question here. It says, "Hi, Mike. Thank you for the inspirational presentation. One question: when you realized the company was on a downward spiral, why did you not sell off to MTN or Airtel on an acquisition model? Kind of cut your losses and move on."
Yeah, great question. And so you have to kind of go back to that point in time where, first of all, in a market like Zambia, acquisitions didn't happen, right? So this was just like very, very early. And we were the dominant player in the market, and we were about to close a $40 million investment. And they were then aggressively starting to come at us. So we weren't in a position where we were looking to sell, and they weren't in a position where they were looking to buy. And once we kind of once like the winds shifted and our investment round fell apart, and they had carpet bombed like the market. They each spent about $50 million US dropping like marketing campaigns and kiosks into the market, and we were running out of cash. They therefore weren't interested in buying us at that point, and it would have been like a fire sale. And we were in such a weak position, and we had no trust with them that we didn't think that even if we tried to sell to them, that we would get to the end of the sale, or that we would get any kind of fair value from that. And so what we did do is we sold our Malawi business to Mukuru. So that was a sale that did go through, and we were able to then use the cash for that to kind of reinvest and kind of refocus on Zambia, restructure the company, in addition to a new investment of cash from our shareholders. And my co-founder, Brett, has spun off another fintech called Tilt. So Zona still exists in Zambia. It actually is interoperable. It does cash in, cash out for MTN, for Airtel, for banks. And then there's another like technology platform, like using the Zona technology to do payments for corporate customers and other players in the market as well. So there's some more details of that in the book as well, but hopefully that helps.
Okay, so another question we have is, how would you recommend people to respond to competition like you did with MTN and Airtel?
Yeah, it's I thought about this a lot after I left, and like on one hand, it's an easy narrative to say like, oh well, we should have just sold to them early, or we shouldn't have tried to compete, because we knew that the competition was coming. We knew they had deeper pockets. But the reality was that we were beating them for a long time, and we could have continued beating them if we had moved faster. And the real lesson I learned from that was we expanded too quickly and lost focus on our core market, because the time and money and energy we spent trying to go into Mozambique, what if we had actually invested in Zambia and we had rolled out our Zona Plus digital banking offer a year earlier, we would have been in such a strong position that I'm convinced that no matter what MTN and Airtel had done, we would have had that market locked up. And so it was a really big lesson for me around focus, and also just knowing like the resources like at your disposal. So we needed to sink that money into our core markets, and there was a reason like why we didn't, because there was a currency crisis, and our investors were pushing us hard to like expand and diversify, and we also like thought we had a working model that was defensible. So like that was a decision point that I think we could have done things differently, and like potentially even thought at that point, well, maybe when we were strong, maybe that would have been the time to say, well, we want to expand into a Pan-African model using our technology, but maybe we can either sell our agent network or find like strategic partnerships that kind of give us more protection in our core markets. That like, so putting that into like a lesson or a piece of advice, you know, don't underestimate your competitors is number one. And when you know that you have deep pocketed competitors, like don't be scared of taking them on, because like we prove that you can. But I think you need to be really smart and strategic about it, and really like, realistic about your positioning. And it is when you are most comfortable that you should probably be the most worried, right? So that was another lesson for me, is like when we were worried, we actually should have been, you know, confident, and when we were confident, we actually should have been worried. And as soon as like things are going well, like that's when everybody's studying your model, they're making plans to attack. And so you need to be really thinking clearly around, well, what is our next move and how do we stay ahead of the game? And what is the right time to kind of partner versus compete?
Okay, Mike, so the last question I'll take is, can you translate the lessons you learned into other sectors, especially entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and so I end my book with exactly the answer to that question. So I'll leave this as a bit of a teaser, but there are 5 virtues, which are like my action-oriented values, and then a set of 20 principles that are universally applicable. And like this is for not only for entrepreneurs, but I believe can help people in their life, around like how to build teams, how to build culture, how to persevere, you know, in the face of adversity, how to embrace failure. And so I would encourage everybody, if you're interested, hopefully you grab the book and dive in, and I hope they help you in your business and lives.
All right, so thank you, Mike, for your presentation and answering the questions. So colleagues, just before we end off, I will do the lucky prize draw, and one of you will walk away with R1,000 Take a Lot voucher. And the winner today is Claudia Silva, the account manager at First Technology Western Cape. Congratulations, Claudia. I will send you your Take a Lot voucher shortly. So in conclusion, I would like to thank Mike for his brilliant presentation, and thank you to all of you who joined the Poker SA Ponder presentation. Thank you to Davey for assisting in hosting the event as well. Thank you, colleagues, and goodbye.
Thank you.